Hi, everyone, and we are back tonight with Behind the Screens, another series with Sirsu tonight. Hello.
Hey, how's it going? Hello,
Hey.
everybody.
Good. So, as usual, we're going to have David from KnownOrigin to give us a quick intro about the platform and the series. David, after you.
Hi, everyone. It's that time of the week again when we get to see some autumn artists and we get to find out a bit more about them, see what their inspirations are, what their practices are, their methods. Tonight's no exception. We've got Sirsu with us. He's a digital artist that's really pushing kind of access tokens and NFTs to a whole new place. He's got a project called Digital Bodies, which I'm sure he'll tell you more about. I've personally bought an early access NFT because I'm super excited about the project. If you have any questions that you want to ask Sirsu and Serena, please tweet KnownOrigin_.io on Twitter, and I will try and get those back to the guys in YouTube. Please retweet and share the link. We want as many people viewing this as we can. I will hand over back to Serena and let you guys do your thing. Thank you so much, Sirsu, for taking the time to jump on behind the screens tonight. I'm excited by this one. You guys have a good night. I'll be in the background getting some questions for you guys.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, David. We'll see you soon. Take care. Here we go. So welcome to the series. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. This is pretty awesome. I'm very excited just to talk about my art, talk about crypto space, the NFT space, everything related to it. So I'm here. Let's do it.
Awesome. So I want to know more about yourself, what you do, and how you arrived into the crypto art space, which I think might be pretty exciting for you. So, but first of all, let's start. What about you based?
Yeah, so I'm based in Harlem, New York City. Shout out to everybody from New York City. I'm currently at my parents' right now in Philadelphia, though, because, you know, COVID-19, whatnot. But based in New York City, mostly.
And, you know, I guess everyone's curious to know more about how you started your career as an artist, or how do you actually define what you do, as I know you do multiple things. So how would you like to call it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the most LinkedIn title that I came up with was sort of a multidisciplinary designer. But, you know, honestly, I kind of just find myself a person that is a creative thinker. And I wanted to, when I was in university, I wanted to figure out how I could take creative thoughts and move it into actual like physical, tangible things and objects. So, you know, the easiest way to do that, I suppose, was like, okay, maybe let's pursue a career in art. And I kind of always had like that thing, like as a kid. I mean, I drew as soon as I could pick up a pencil. I think I got inspired by my younger cousin, Dom, who used to draw. And I went to his house one time. I think I was like maybe 3 or something like that, and was like, oh, that looks cool. I'm gonna try to do the same thing. And you know, kind of started from there, and then that sort of evolved into getting interested into coding. And so I kind of did a little bit of that when MySpace was huge. My way to get into people's top 5s and top 8s was to like create their design their web page, like their whole profile page. And then from there, that was like, okay, well, if I could creatively make objects that are interactive and also static things, perhaps there's something here that I could kind of like merge the two. That brought me into, exactly. That brought me to Savannah College of Art and Design, where, you know, I graduated in service design and anthropology. And then that pretty much expanded my mental modeling, just how I can conceptualize and put particular topics, themes, and things together that might be unorthodox. And then also just got me really thinking about how I could leverage art from a designer perspective, and to, you know, kind of like push an interesting narrative out no matter what I'm doing. So my art always has a particular purpose or ideology attached to it. I think all art is purposeful in some way. Art is political. And so I want to be able to kind of like dial up on those nodes culturally through the work that I'm doing. So that's pretty much brought me here today. I wouldn't be here in the crypto space without some of my homies who've been in crypto forever, like for my friend Leighton McDonald or Late FX, I got to meet some of his other homies, Harry Chada, for example, and then one of my other good friends, Nikki Chulo, too. So shout out to all three of them. They got me into the NFT space, and now we're here.
Awesome. Yes, it sounds like a very interesting story. But I want to go back, if you don't mind, to what you said about art, that art is political and art always has a purpose. Because I think it's really important that we discuss that element a bit more. And by looking through some of your works, I went through your body of work that you have on KnownOrigin, but also the broader work that you do also as well as a designer. I was always sort of attracted by the fact that you use some elements that tend to repeat themselves in the work, such as, for example, old computer screens or some elements related to the digital bodies rendered in like 3D. And I was curious to know more about those aspects, how you see the relationship between the purpose of the art and the technology that you tend to represent within the artworks.
Word. That's a really good question. And so the way that I've looked at it is I took a class in college called biomimicry. And it was sort of the study of nature and how you can leverage nature and its wondrous means of solving its own problems or creating its own environments, and then leveraging that in a design perspective. One of the really good examples is like the Shinkansen train in Japan, where an engineer kind of studied the aerodynamics of one of their particular native birds and was able to create sort of like the slope that's in the front of these trains for aerodynamic purposes. And so we see that type of work, everywhere, but not a lot of us tap into that. But what you see in nature is that there's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of like pattern and habit forming and things that repeat. And so a lot of my work, I want to be able to kind of gravitate towards those similar themes of repetition, because in a certain way, messages stick with you the more you see them. And so if I want to deliver something to you, then I want to be able to kind of create it in a way in which we're, I'm pushing that narrative out. And I'm just remixing and retelling sort of the similar story, just in different ways. Shout out to my Twitch fam. How you guys doing?
Hey, I love that we have people coming and commenting. Please feel free to get those comments and questions coming. We'll be very happy to chat with you all during this live talk. I would love if we can start sharing some of your incredible work on screen so that we can start commenting on some of the work. I know you've prepared something special for us tonight, so please feel free to take us through the journey of your work.
Totally.
Thank you so much. I love to see the digital bodies project that David was mentioning. But I'll let you take us through the way you prefer.
Awesome. Yeah. So I just showed the Digital Bodies website. It's just hosted live, digitalbodies.xyz. And so right now I'm in the middle of doing a huge, massive web redesign so that there's an interesting content delivery, but that's going to come with a lot of interesting things. So for example, with this new content delivery, there's going to be a particular social token that's unlocked with this. There's going to be a big announcement very soon. So when that happens, you'll be able to see kind of like the evolution of this concept. But essentially what I wanted to do was find a platform for me to tell interesting stories from a speculative, futurist perspective, whether that's fiction or nonfiction. And then pair that with art, and then also create conversations around the particular work. I have them split up into two different things: broadcasts and artifacts. Broadcasts are the things that kind of have a lot more of a conversational element to them, and artifacts are much more of a grimoire card or very lore related. So you'll have a particular object or asset that's canonized in an NFT format, and then with a brief description. And then for broadcast, you might have more interactive media. For instance, it might be animated, it might be a film attached to it, it might be audio, so on and so forth. And so that's kind of how I'm breaking out sort of the two trains of thought with this digital bodies experience. Everything that I'm doing is related to kind of how we embody ourselves in the virtual environment. And because of that, digital bodies may not actually be forms like human forms. We could be almost anything, you know, no matter whatever platform, ideology, or whatever you have. If you, let's say, for example, we are in Decentraland, and the Decentraland decided to say, let's recontextualize avatars. Avatars do not have to be, you know, bipedal humanoid people, right? It could be anything. You would start to see an explosion of ideas of people saying, well, look, well, like I like animals, so I'm going to be an octopus. Or this person might say, I like fantasy characters, so I'm a minotaur, or whatever the case is. The way in which we see ourselves in a digital space sometimes shows a lot more about who we are, more so than just kind of like the body that we already physically inhabit. And so I want to try to like find ways to explore those types of themes too with this type of work. But so far, a lot of this has just been very experimental, and just kind of like feeling out exactly how I want to sort of like craft these stories and tell them. So one of the first things that I created from an artifact perspective was something called a monolith. And these are just, you know, very simple shapes that I've arranged with some lighting and Blender, did like a light render, put it through some grain textures that I sort of created on Photoshop. And if anybody wants interesting film grainy-esque textures, please hit me up. I'm going to release like a free pack of that at some point. But in any case, what I wanted to do was try to create a 4-issue series kind of detailing this idea of the path to enlightenment, but just using objects. Instead of people, instead of, you know, like places or things, how can simple shapes talk about an idea in an abstract way, but have something that feels a little bit more concrete? So in this one, Monolith 1, this is called The Offering, where you kind of have like the like a ring of these weird trapezoidal structures, and there's a radiant glowing light in the middle, illuminating a spherical object, and obviously in that middle as well. And so what you can kind of like sort of see is that like the this ring of these trapezoidal figures might be reminiscent of sort of like people, thoughts, ideas, and that's something that's radiating between that group of them, ascending to like this this orb is kind of like they're offering themselves to this particular other object. So that was one way that I wanted to sort of like try to contextualize kind of a thought process or an idea. What was very fun too was being able to add different colors. It provided a different mood to the pieces and created something that when I had shopped it around, like for example, people were saying red felt a little bit more sinister in nature. And then if you think about the idea of like offering and then like you have like this red, then you're kind of wondering what type of energy that's emitting or what type of like, you know, environment that might be. Same thing with like yellow, this gold kind of gives something a little bit more like ancient in a way, since gold is not necessarily that reticent in like in our current mythos of work, but gold definitely is a historical artifact that's always used to kind of talk about something that's like either, you know, worthy of great value or something mystical. And then with blue, you kind of get like a hybrid between something that's like mystical and very interesting, but kind of exploratory and deep, because this could either be symbolic of like an ocean or, you know, just something a little bit more heavy from a mood perspective. So that was kind of like the first thing that I had done. You know, I created like, you know, again, like these 3D compositions using big shapes. And so they express ritualistic structures. First one being offering of self. The second one is sort of like this detachment, or like this idea of duplication, splitting the mind. So you have like this one bigger spherical object that could be symbolic of everything that is composed of you, and then these fractional spheres that are part of the means of splitting or removing certain things from you, or detaching parts of yourself to reconstruct into a different whole. And so you kind of can see that here too in this one as well, which is a lot more of a mood setting thing than anything. But you can kind of see how, at least especially in this one, it's like the metaphor is hits a lot harder because the sphere sort of like blends into the top half of of the
Yeah.
object. So you're starting to
Yeah.
see how that actual split like really looks. So that's what I try to do. I try to take like, if I am using 3D, I try to use 3D elements that are very simple, but I leverage composition and texture and color to try to accentuate whatever theme that I want to talk about. Because I'm not a 3D modeler, like I'm not someone that like spends a lot of time really building up a lot of these objects. I really like give my flowers and like my attention and like love to the people who do and have spent like their career building 3D environments. And that's why I like collaborating with them. And so like the CRT Madness collection that I worked with, Mez Visuals, like sort of accentuates that ideology where I've been able to take the texture, the color, and the composition and his 3D modeling ability to create a completely different set of work that I wouldn't have been able to do alone. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so great to collaborate with people that in a way complement what the skills you have, you know, the knowledge. And I think especially now it's been such a trend in a way, because I've been speaking with so many artists throughout this series, and I find that this is actually a good way of completing each other's work, you know, and complementing what we do. And it's such a beautiful thing that I think everyone has learned to do more and more throughout the pandemic. So I just wanted to yeah, it's interesting to say how works actually come together in a moment where we're so far away from one another, but actually the internet makes us come so close.
Absolutely.
And create so, you know, powerful content.
Yeah, no, I love the fact that, you know, we've been able to, through our work, find like-minded individuals and say, hey, I love what you're doing. I hope you like what I'm doing. Let's put our minds together and, you know, blow people's minds in a way. Like really, what can we do together to make something that's interesting that we both like? And, you know, and for me, I'm always about how can we push the boundaries of things? You know, how can we get people to really be excited about what we're doing in the space? And for me, you know, I'm fortunate that my work has been able to sell and has been in the hands of really awesome people. But that's never been kind of like my motivating factor for being in the space. I think what's interesting is that like when we talk about crypto art and we think of the traditional art scene or traditional kind of like art markets, we find that there's a lot of artists who've tried the traditional market and are now using crypto art as a means to kind of like build their own legend. And I think a lot of artists are able to sort of do that. We can kind of do our own lore smithing and also have the added benefit that the work that we create sets precedent, sets provenance for our own IP, and allows us to kind of operate in a way in which we feel protected, that our work is not going to be taken advantage of and that it's going to be respected. And I think that that's the interesting like interplay that like crypto art really has with artists who really want to get into this space. And that's why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, just to show that like, hey, like the work that I'm making is causing conversation. It's getting people excited about being a part of this platform. And so now it's just about partnering with exchanges and talking with, you know, organizations like yourself, working with like David with KnownOrigin, working with the guys at One Off, for example, or even Woka, so on and so forth, to see how can we create interoperability and allowing people who are outside of the space to come in a very frictionless way. And I think part and parcel to that is having really good artists advocate for the space and really show how powerful, like, you know, this world actually is. So hopefully that's kind of the, you know, the job that I think that I'm wanting to do in this space, and hopefully I find myself achieving that. So
yeah, well, yes, absolutely. I think most of us are, you know, in line with what you just said. And it will be interesting to see where we can take this in a year's time, because I think, you know, years in the crypto world are so fast.
Yes, I it's crazy. It's like, okay, it's like we have like this doubling effect where like COVID makes everything feel like we've moved a decade because everything's at a standstill. But then crypto also moves just as fast. So I felt like I've aged 20 years. and I have it. Like it's only been like, you know, 9-10 months, but it's nuts. It's like you know, and I think because of the fact that we've got this weird effect where COVID has slowed everything down and we age due to like boredom, and then we have crypto, which ages us due to like everything just rapidly being, you know, new technology coming out like you know, day in and day out. It's very hard to kind of find yourself like, okay, well, what do I listen to? Where do I follow? What kind of threads do I pull? And so I definitely think it's our job to try to find ways to create that thread between the two things and say, here's kind of a nice tangible path for you to follow. Based upon, you know, all the work that we're doing, you know, the way in which like we need to have people that are helping to codify this process. There's a lot of really awesome folks, you know, that are writing about crypto in general. And I think like being able to partner with those individuals too, and then partnering with people like you as well, like we're helping to build that tangible thread that people can walk through. But yeah, it's nuts, but I love it.
Yeah, 100%. I'm loving instead what I see here on screen, because I really would like for you to spend a few words about the design that you came up with. You know, this kind of like 90s look computer screen, and you know, the smiley face and the menu and everything, because I think, you know, that there is a sense of distortion, and in a way the fact that we're going back to the 80s, 90s, and there's a kind of, you know, familiar look, but in a way it's super cutting edge. And the fact that we take this into the crypto space, it tells us something in the way we used to probably imagine technology and the future that we're currently living in, you know. So I'm curious to know more about the design that you are exploring in this piece.
For sure. So again, shout out to Mez Visuals who worked with me on this. I reached out to him when I told him I was doing like this digital bodies project, and I said, hey dude, I went on Make Human. I took my measurements of my body and then like had like a very base level like model, and I was like, hey, can you do something cool with this? And like I gave him a set of like, you know, very rough things. I was like, I'm thinking of maybe an idea talking about like either transference or like repetition or deletion or whatever, just kind of think of some things. And he said, hey, what if we, and I was like, well, I want to kind of have this guy sitting down and kind of like looking at a monitor or something. So then he said, well, what if his body is the monitor? And I was like, huh, run with that. Just like make something and just let me know what, you know, just whatever. So he gave me the model of the dude with the CRT, of myself basically with the CRT head, but I'm marbleized and I'm kind of like sliced. So I'm like, okay, now I have like three things that are happening here. The first is the monitor, because it's a CRT monitor and it's old, it gives me something that's a call to nostalgia. So I'm like, okay, that's one thing. The second thing is because my body is marbleized, like that's something that is sort of fits within the realm of an artifact, something you'd find in a museum or some sort of like old era that no longer exists. So I'm like, okay, we have nostalgia. Then we also have like this really interesting historical like layer on top of it that I can play with, something that feels like ancient but somewhat important. And then the slicing kind of just adds the extra dramatic effect of, you know, perhaps either it's like wear, it's tear, it's degradation over time. And so I was like, okay, so now I have very interesting, compelling themes. And then from that perspective, I'm like, okay, how do I contextualize that from a digital perspective? It's like, all right, well, if our bodies are sort of digital, what if in the future we had sort of like these monitor structures kind of acted as portals to access older areas of time? So then that came up with the idea to say, okay, well, this CRT monitor needs to be active. You can interact with it. So then I created kind of like an old version of what an old computer in the 90s would look like, you know, using, mono space font. This one is space mono. It's free if anybody wants to use it. Because it's like we didn't necessarily have anti-aliasing or sharpness, whatever the case is, to actually like, you know, like with the user experience. Also, the same thing with the icons. The iconography is pixelated. So I'm like, okay, cool. Got a lot of those things kind of going on. So then I'm like, okay, well, if this is the case, what do I want to sort of talk about? So I had this idea to say, to talk about like CRT and then madness. And then I was like, all right, well, this is now getting into somewhat of a fictional kind of like construct. I had an old story that I had written about a work experience I had when I was at Audible, when I worked the audiobook company that Amazon owns. And I kind of fictionalized it a little bit because some of the stuff is not necessarily accurate. But some of the things that were I would work very late hours, and then in Newark, New Jersey, when I did work there between September to February of 2015 to 16, it was very gray. It was raining a lot. So we have this very gray backdrop. We have, these like ceiling windows. So you get to see this, all the cloudness, all the grays, and just very like humdrum. And then you have all these monitors that are just blue flickering lights all the time. And so you have this, like, it feels very dystopian in a way, because you're just like, you're a cog in a machine, kind of like building up this thing and working, and there's no semblance of the outside feeling sunny or jovial or cheery. And I felt like after a while you kind of get mad, you kind of grow mad. And so I was like, I'm going to use this story as the anchor for this madness phenomena that I want to talk about. And then that helped me kind of like map out how I did the rest of the whole series. I have like 5 pieces. And so each one kind of deals with like a person that like journaled and their experiences in a space program in a way. And then they had interacted through these CRT monitors because it was sort of a method of training that they would need to undergo, because the technology that they carried with them was going to be old, and but they needed it wherever they were going, traveling, several galaxies away or whatever the case is. So I ended up like building up this really interesting like macro and micro like worldview just within like this environment. And so that's what sort of created like this initial piece, and then that spawned how 2, 3, 4, 5 came out.
Can we take a look at the I can see them there on the screen, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. So this is one kind of like what it looks like in full. And then of course, if you're on digital bodies, you can read the actual logs. And then of course, like I use a photo of myself too. So a lot of this stuff is it kind of brings in very interesting personal layers to this. But it's like, but you'll be able to see how it's kind of like anchored together.
Yeah. What is so fascinating about these work is that you've actually had an opportunity here to include not just the owner, but the actual society, into the body of work that you've created. So you've taken elements from, things that everyone had seen in the past and is sort of in relationship, even right now, which is technology, which is the fact that we always have a body that we live with, the fact that we relate with the brain, with what's going on within us, and always this kind of like interface, which is our extension in a way. And you've condensed everything into a work of art, and you get the owner of the work to participate in this ceremony, with you. And it's so cathartic in a way. So I just wanted to highlight that, because I think in something simple that we see, and we might enjoy the rendering of what we see, the outcome, there's actually so many powerful meanings behind it that you just explained, and the story is simply just so powerful.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean that's ultimately kind of the goal here, is to say, how can we make work that feels like a co-creation or a conversation between myself and the person that ends up owning the piece. And I think the cool thing about like, again, like the crypto art phenomena is that, like the best of both worlds. And I was having a conversation, with the folks at One Up that I partner with a lot, and I'll talk a little bit more about our partnership later. Is that we expressly talked about the idea that sort of the best work in the crypto space is kind of the one that's the most visible, because the most visibility starts to point to this zeitgeist of a conversation around whatever the piece is and what it's doing. But ultimately, the very interesting part about why someone would be incentivized to own the piece is that they're kind of the center of that conversation. And so because of the fact that somebody, when they buy a piece of mine or whatever, I'm establishing a dialogue with them. They get to know more about me. They get to know more about the piece and sort of everything sort of around it. They become a steward of that information. And so depending on how like the work gets like pushed out there and how it has more visibility, more eyes on it, then this person is able to help navigate this sort of cultural meta that exists as a result of the work getting more and more and more visible and seen in more hands. And I think if we start looking at crypto art and like the aspect of NFT ownership in that context, I think we also might be able to have people, we'll be able to kind of remove the idea or the conversation around. So, why would I own a digital object or digital asset when everyone can see it? It's like, well, that's sort of the point. The point is for more people to see this work so that it helps enable kind of like or add to the overarching story about how the work came to be. And then obviously they now have to point to the person that owns it and say, wow, do you realize what powerful device you hold now? Like, it's not just a static image or it's not just an animation. This is a conversation. This is an environment. This is a space in which things are influenced by it and things are influencing it at the same time. So yeah, I definitely appreciate the fact that you talked about that a little bit, because that's ultimately like the goal of what every piece that I make is to have some sort of impact in that way.
I think it's also the characteristic of this movement that the owner of the piece, or the owners, the audience that is appreciating the work and sharing it and owning and divulgating the work with others, it's taking a role.
Yes.
In the creation of the work as well, or at least in the life that the work has once it's left the artist, in a way. I mean, the art really never leaves the artist, but he has, it can take on its own life. And having a part in that is like stepping on stage and being part of a play.
Absolutely.
And it's, it's opening up so many doors, especially to the world of art that has always been so restrictive in a way to people that could afford to be part of that play. And now we're kind of like opening up to more. Of course, there are in terms of the price or in terms of what people can own, but I think the way you structured these body of works, it's accessible and meant to be shared. So I just think that your work also takes on the next level of what art can be in the digital realm these days.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, that ultimately, that's if that's what's being said now, then that I'm doing my job, and like it's only going to incentivize me to do more. Shout out to Noah in the chat. How you guys doing in there? I see the chat active. Superman, we will get to questions very soon. I definitely want to answer a few of those in a minute. I'm going to burn through a couple more of these pieces, and then we'll definitely talk about metaverses and whatnot. This is the second one. This is called Plugged In. Relic of the Forgotten Ones. Again, sort of the same idea that these sort of objects are interactive relics that hold and contain keys and ideologies of a particular past. This one seems to be a lot more interconnected, and this was a very interesting thing that Mez had made as a result of also working with the 3D structure. I mean, of course, I added all the other graphical elements in the backgrounds and whatnot, but he gave me the 3D model with kind of like this interesting like wires that are sort of stretched on either end. And I said, I could use that in some way. Like, that's a very interesting like part of the composition. And then kind of like pushing those elements together. I was like, all right, you know what? Well, what if going back to the first one, if the first one is plugged in one way and is active and it acts as a computer terminal, then perhaps maybe this one acts more as a kind of like propaganda machine and pushing out like particular layers of information. But because it's a relic and it's old, you no longer see the actual, whatever the content used to be, no longer there anymore. So that was a very interesting thing that I could mess about with that there and say, okay, well, perhaps this one was like something that had a different purpose than what the first one was. And so I started to attach each different, CRT relic and assign it with a different purpose. And I think that's what also added to this, the lore and made the world, at least in which these things sort of inhabit, a lot more believable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's very interesting. And I really love the design, the actual look of the work is
Thank
so
you.
fresh. And it's fascinating to see this grass sort of like popping up from the ground and entering the body, even like going through the arms and having this section in the arms, and this very natural setup. But in a way, as you go to the head, it takes on a different shape, a different form, and it takes you also to a different level. So it's kind of like how nature and technology as well are connected, as if technology is not really that far from how nature is conceived in a way.
Right. It's so funny. I was having a conversation with a couple of folks on this app called Clubhouse, and we talked about how technology, most people only think of technology in the digital sense or man-made technology, but how nature works and like the science around how, and going back to biomimicry and like the practice of studying nature from a design perspective, that is its own like technology as well. Like biology is the technology of nature and like the natural processes of things. And so I think if we look at it from that context as well, then yeah, of course we can make the interplay between man-made technological structure and then natural technological structures and see how these things could be interconnected or merged together. And there's a very interesting video game that I've played called Horizon Zero Dawn that kind of talks about that in a very interesting, like abstract way, where there's a whole world event that happens. And then, of course, technology is utilized as a means to revitalize the world. And so now the world that these people inhabit, even though it feels prehistoric, also is like prehistoric. Like there's a prehistoric nature of it, but then it's also powered by technology. So you see like these saber-toothed, like tiger type of animals, but they're technologically made from a man-made perspective. They're like machine more so than actual nature, but they operate in a very natural way. They kind of have the same sort of hunting patterns, whatever. And even like the trees and kind of the actual nature itself is also powered by sort of man-made technology, but it feels and looks natural. So that's an interesting thing too, of saying, well, perhaps maybe in a very interesting like other world that might be not too far from us now, we could see nature kind of embodying more of a man-made technical look in a feel and appeal, but still have kind of the same things that make nature.
Wow. Yes. Yeah. That's so correct. And I think it's just a matter of perspective and the mindset that we've been used to have, to adopt in certain circumstances. Yes. And this one is super fun.
Yeah,
I love the animation that you've created.
Yeah, so when Mez sent me this, and this one's purely out of all the 5 pieces, this one's definitely more Mez than me. But I love the fact that he kind of like took the CRT monitor thing as we were going through the first couple of iterations, and then was like, you know what, like let's continue with this like theme of sort of a meta within a meta, and then kind of like push out like this internet ideology. And then in the back, he kind of has like, sort of like these randomized numbers and like hash codes. And I was like, okay, cool. This is very interesting. And so I asked him to sort of give me a title. And he was like, I want to do something with like, I don't know, like the internet or like network searching or something. And so we came up with the title of like network search, like this like sort of internet superhighway, where at least if anything, you've got the first one that's dealing with, again, kind of an access terminal. The second one dealing with propaganda in one particular way, or at least plugged into like this global consciousness that's no longer available. The third one is definitely more about kind of like how you have this anonymity and ubiquitousness when it comes to participating in the internet. You can kind of inhabit any particular shell digitally. And that goes back into the meta theme of digital bodies and how we can inhabit any and sort of any and everything when we're like like being present within these internet spaces, these metaverses and whatnot. And so this is kind of like a manifestation of that in a way. And how like, we're sort of like all this type of object as we're going through, our internet activities. So it's a very kind of like on the nose metaphor here, where the other ones are a lot more abstract. This one kind of like hits you, from the jump.
Yeah. And I like on this one that I just wanted to point these out, that is black and white.
Yes.
Because in a way it's so cutting edge, but at the same time it goes back to kind of like what there's no light, there's no colors. It goes back to the origin.
Yes.
And it shows that natural look of what things are at the origin, at the very start, as there's a,
right.
Absolutely. When these things are born. I don't know how to say that, but
yeah, like you can definitely see that from like, you kind of have like the space theme in the background too, and it's kind of like, in certain ways like kind of a call to, like you said, like a point of origin. And so like out of pitch darkness, you have kind of like light and things kind of like seep out of that and creates this entire colorful sort of like world. But before then, you're kind of like navigating in a very like dark space. And then if you're a person that doesn't know how to code or program things, then if you're operating in the real sort of like binary code sense of things from a computer perspective, then you are operating in black and white also. So that's kind of like the means in which we would communicate with computers too. Is not necessarily the most colorful, but what you tell it, how you program the computer, will then create more of the colorful things that we see, love, and interact with. So yeah, there's like multiple layers of it, for sure, that you just called upon. And so that's definitely some of the stuff that we wanted to like push out here. And
it could also be that this is the way the computer sees it, sees the art, or communicates with us. It's kind of like we create an input, and that's the output. Which
exactly.
Is right. It's interesting. As you said, there's different layers of communication here. But yeah.
So then the fourth one, this one is definitely a lot more of a propaganda machine, which I thought was funny. And it's called Propaganda Movements. It's like again, another one like that's sort of like on the nose. It's just what happens when you have a hive mind. Does that create issues? Does it create a very interesting kind of like cultural zeitgeist movement? What kind of conversations happen when you have a multitude of folks kind of like in concert spitting out the same ideas, the same things? And this was something that I wanted to kind of like call upon when we're talking about social media, when we're talking about politics, when we're talking about kind of like the idea of misinformation or disinformation, the subterfuge of how like, the stuff that the things that we're being taught or are told, or even are taught even in a educational context, for example, how might that affect our worldview and our thought process and our habits, and being able to critically think about the information that comes in front of us. And in many cases, when you have been sort of like beaten down by the machine for so long, then like you kind of spit out the same kind of ideas over time. And so it's funny, I don't think Mez really intended for his sort of distorted smiley face to kind of bring upon that kind of like horror to the piece or to anything. But you know, in a way, it's almost like when somebody like browbeats you into always being incessantly positive, even when you're not, you kind of get like this fake smile persona, this sort of like thing where like everything's fine, even though you know that it isn't. And you convince yourself about it for so long that becomes your actual, you know, way in which you know, like say things or feel, or that becomes your truth. And so I wanted to kind of pull upon that and really like say like, yeah, this is kind of horrifying when you think about it. And so, you know, I made like an alternate version of this too, where it's kind of like from the other end of and you know how people kind of like say like Big Brother or like Third Eye, whatever. Sort of like that same thing of saying like we are a hive mind of folk that are watching what the world does, and that we're also influencing what the world does by kind of drumming out the same sort of robotic and monotonous messages, that could be positive, negative, neutral. You never really know, but even the most neutral or even the most positive things could be harmful if those things aren't checked and made sure that that information is actually like accurate. You know, and how in being able to develop discernment with what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're touching, what we're feeling. Because I think that's something that like a lot of us are losing over time, especially because of how world events have been really beating all of us up. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we've got, you know, a global pandemic that's happening in the States. Obviously, we have a very like, you know, incompetent political structure right now, and we're seeing how kind of like promises of certain things being quote unquote great or whatever the case is to certain folks not being met. We're seeing kind of like the continual trend of, you know, police brutality, systemic racism, sexism, xenophobia, misgendering, all sorts of, you know, discriminatory things happening to all sorts of people. And it hasn't stopped. It's not like it's anything. It's not like something where it's like, oh, well, we're seeing it reducing. We're only seeing it grow more. And it's either one or two things. It's either it's gotten worse, or the internet has allowed for these things to be so public that we're now just seeing how entrenched it actually has been this entire time. Both of which are very horrifying when you think
Yes. I was gonna say that. I don't know which one is, you know.
I don't think either one is good, or it's not like I would rather have one or the other. It's like
Yeah.
but
I think it's just highlighting what's been happening in a very brutal way.
Yes. So exactly. And so I wanted to, in a way, find a means to call upon that and say, like, look, you know, and a lot of us are perpetuating these things through computers. Hence, again, we have these monitors, right? And it's like, and also too, I find that a lot of people spew the most vitriol through the digital machine. Like, there are certain people who have enough, I guess, confidence or gumption to say it to your face, but for the most part, most people hide behind the fact that the digital computer the computer is like creates anonymity. It creates a different self that you can embody, that you can inhabit. And therefore, because you have this digital body, you can use it to sort of infect other folk without actually having it impact your physical self, because you can decouple them. And so, and for people, for them, it's a lot easier for them to kind of like spew these terrible things. And so that's why, you know, having this sort of like anonymous marble CRT structure kind of like works, because that's what kind of these people are. You know, it's a relic and it's marbleized because these people embody old ideas. It's an old CRT monitor, which no longer has like the view of how we see things now. Because if you compare the pixel density and kind of like the amount of color and things you can extrapolate from a CRT monitor to that of a 4K machine or whatever that we have now, 4K monitor, it's a night and day difference. And so from that, everything about this is old and ancient and needs to die off, but doesn't yet. And it's like, why doesn't that happen? So, you know, this is sort of like that piece that sort of says like, this stuff is very, very like old and ancient, even with the halftone print. Like a lot of these, even the the way I textured it and all this stuff, I wanted to use very like traditional and old methods in a digital way to communicate this idea of old ideas infecting, kind of like where we are right now and where we could be. And again, that falls back into the madness concept that I wanted to talk about too. So each one of these things like has a different theme, but is really calling upon from a cultural perspective to actually take stock into what we're doing and what we're creating, what we're inputting and outputting through the digital lens, and how our digital bodies actually are creating real cultural, physical impact to all of us in the world that we actually touch and that we actually like deal with on a daily basis. These aren't just kind of like frames in which you can impose a worldview and nothing happens. Whatever we do on the screen actually impacts what happens off of it. And so I want people to be a lot more thoughtful and careful about what they make and what they produce.
Wow. Yes. I think you've touched on so many things, but in a way, to me, this piece talks to the fact that there's a mass out there, and as you said, we still allow so many things to happen, and it feels like we've been brainwashed, or maybe we're too aware of things. So it's either one or the other, but at the same time, we don't take action. Or maybe we try to take action, but this thing is too big for us to control. Or maybe we don't know how to handle it. So it raises up so many questions, and I think it really makes you take a step back and think about how you act as an individual within society, among others. And these figures sort of like stepping up, or being more isolated on one side of the work, can represent that feeling of being isolated among others, and how the rest continues to go on. It doesn't stop. It never stops. And it's interesting to see this conflict that in a way we may have tried to stop in a way, or to change course, but still is bigger than us. So makes you think about so many aspects of society, and probably the fact that we're here in this specific time dealing with so many things at one, and how this makes us feel, and what probably, it's kind of like here we have an option. We either stick to what we know and do and we're used to, or we take a different path. So I like this work because it really challenged the viewer's mind on whether to be part of that mass or finding an alternative.
Absolutely. I do think too, we're in a place to where we can actually do something about it. Like the blockchain technology gives us transparency and provenance, right? Cryptocurrency as a layer on top of that has multiple uses, right? We've got tokens that deal with governance and how we vote and put forth proposals for communities to make great change, right? We've got actual real currency that we can use in exchange from a very fungible perspective, where I'm trading this token for goods and services that our community, offers, right? You've got other tokens that deal from social currency, which could help build reputation, or, kind of like help create a circular economy for particular artists, creatives, and just other interesting people that have a community of like-minded individuals, right? And as a result of this, we can start to create our own sovereign states on the internet, on the blockchain. And this idea of sovereignty and ownership can supersede that of the sovereign nation states that we currently physically inhabit. And if we can find ways to like build very interesting, compelling systems that are counterculture and also insanely beneficial to all of us physically through the internet, then how could that effectively change the actual physical realm of things? Whereas perhaps our government may say that like they can't allocate funds for education, but in the crypto sense, in a community that's an advocate for education, we could do our own thing and say, well, if you guys aren't going to do this kind of work, then we as a community can band together and actually do something that's different. And then that's going to challenge these systems and say, well, shit, like if these people are building, sovereignty that's ignoring ours, what does that mean for us? How are we going to be able to adapt to that? Because they can't get rid of the blockchain. It's not something that they could just turn off. They could put regulation on how certain things might be developed or built, but as an overall principle and practice, this thing can't be stopped. So there's a way in which we can leverage it in a very like social innovate, like in a way that like promotes social innovation, social good, and we can still all benefit and live off of it and eat off of this thing. And like, we can remove, I think from a very like lower level, we can remove the idea of a starving artist, right? Every artist can have their own sort of circular economy in which their work is promoted, their work is cherished, and their work like enables them to kind of like live a life that they create art for the rest of their life, right? In a very healthy, positive way. Yeah. On top of that, right, we can have artists that collaborate with other artists to help create a much more bigger cultural meta and zeitgeist around the work that we're doing and help, shine lights on issues, ideas, opportunities, things that we could aspire to in the physical context. Another layer on top of that is building protocols, tools, levels of governance for these micro and macro communities to come together and make things better in the physical environment, not just in just a digital one, right? And so then at that other point, I don't know if we hit utopia or anything like that, but it sure as hell feels better to try to do something like that than it is where we are now. And so that's kind of like, hopefully at the end of the day, like that's a part of the wave and phenomena that I want to be a part of. And that's one of the biggest reasons why, after being exposed to crypto and after being exposed to crypto art most specifically, even though it's a niche within a niche, it's something that I definitely can see like being very instrumental in bringing forth really cool radical change.
Mm-hmm. Well, what you just described, I think it's something that most of us wait for and want it so desperate to happen, but it is happening in a way. And I'm very happy to also be part of these movements. So I really wanted to thank you for giving the right words to what has been happening over the past few years. And hopefully we'll see this growing and having more artists participating within this movement and having a healthier approach to the art world.
Absolutely.
I think now it's the right time to answer these questions, perhaps, as we are sort of like moving towards the end of our talk. But I was very curious to ask you what your view is on the metaverse and more specifically onto the art world. And that's a question that comes from Zapman from Twitter.
Awesome. Well, very good question. And it's funny because I pulled up a piece that sort of kind of talks about this in a very interesting abstract way. Shout out to Art Information. This is my first collaboration, and my actual genesis meant on KnownOrigin was this collaboration called Ideas in Motion. And so I was looking at some vinyl, and I was kind of like trying to like figure out, how I wanted to sort of communicate a particular idea. And there has been a trend on Instagram with a couple of different folks. I think Estefania is one of them, and then a couple of other people who have been making really interesting like graphics from famous quotes, whatever. And it feels very minimalist and kind of like 1960s, graphic design. So I wanted to take a different spin on that and talk about, ideas and movement, right? And so in one context, we have this thing talking about, macro concepts and micro concepts, and how micro kind of like is a lens to macro, and how macro can also be a lens into micro. And then we have transit systems where things kind of come in, ideas get formulated, and things get extracted out. And so when it comes to the metaverse, right, it's like a very physical representation of transience and how kind of things move between these spaces, and how it's sort of an interstitial of a spatial environment from the world that we already have and an imagined world that we can live in. I think what might be interesting is kind of seeing how we can be a little bit more interactive with it, not necessarily just from a VR perspective, but what if we brought the metaverse from that world into the world now? Like, imagine this whole space that I have, right? Whether I'm using glasses or not, but I could call upon Decentraland, or at least an experience, one of the spaces that you can make, right? and actually walk through it in this environment while still seeing this overall anchoring environment that put it in here. That'd be pretty interesting. And I think
I think we'll get there, to be honest.
Totally.
I hope so.
I feel like tech maybe in like 2 to 3 years, like will give us like some prototypes, and then maybe by like year 7, like it'll actually be something that's really working and competent. Like they might be able to build. What might have to happen is like you might have to have like a rig that you kind of like have established with either like cameras or something that point and kind of sort of create a physical imaging of it. I don't know. No. I'm not necessarily a person that's like,
we've seen holograms and AR sort of taking up on stage, and I think these will be more and more used in the future in a way that can be interacted with.
Right. Instead of just using our screen as kind of like the means,
which is quite limiting.
Yeah, it's like don't use the screen. But when it comes to metaverses, I think artists have a very awesome way in 2 different things, right? We can partner with developers to build really cool interactive experiences that encompass kind of like an ideology around your work, and not just from a gallery perspective. Like, and this is why I'm very like excited to be working with the Infinite Art Museum, because when we have our conversations, we talk about how can we recontextualize the idea of a gallery space. Does it have to just be a static thing where the work is on the wall and you walk by it and you look at it? Right? What if we could experience it in an interesting way? And this goes back to kind of like if you're an art history person, I'm going to drop some art history real quick. Like Alan Caprow created a thing called happenings in the 60s, right? Which were just interactive experiences in the physical environment in an art gallery, right? There was one called The Cave, where it was very elaborate, kind of built like this very interesting cavernous structure within a museum, and had people paid as actors to kind of like help people navigate through this space. But you didn't necessarily know that they were helping, that they were navigators. They just, whatever role they were supposed to play, they were going to play that. So if this person was sort of like supposed to be belligerent or something scary, whatever, then like that was their role. They played that part. But it helped you like connect with the art in a very interesting way, because you're now kind of like being a part of this experience. There was one where they melted ice literally outside. There's like a large, insane block of ice, and you watched it melt. But that's interesting. It's creating a conversation. You're like, why is this like this huge giant ice structure in the middle of nowhere melting? And why am I still here watching it? What's up? What's the interplay between like, why am I still here? Right. And so I think with the metaverse, we can build more of those types of things. We see even in the video game context, right, where these happenings have sort of been embodied, where we've looked at Fortnite, for example, and how there are real-time events that have changed the world that you're playing in, and how it becomes a permanent fixture every other time you play the game now. So there's an event that has happened that if you were there and you play it, you've experienced this thing and this bond with millions of other players at the same time. And then now, if somebody else gets invited into the game, or you bring them into the game and they see this new thing, you're like, whoa, this is different than the last time I saw it. And then now you have a conversation saying, yeah, like I was here when X event happened. And I think we can create those types of events, those types of experiences that like add to like the lore and make the world more lived in. Decentraland right now, like it's a nice world. Somnium Space is a nice world, just like CryptoVoxel is a nice world. But there's nothing necessarily for me yet about it that makes it feel alive. And to make it feel alive, we need more of these types of like real-time events. We need artists building very interesting like experiences and changing it up, not just having the same thing over and over like forever, but like making a concerted effort to say, how can I recontextualize my space, or how can I like partner with other people to build things in their spaces and pop these things up and really make it more lived in. How artists have pop-up environments and pop-up shops in the real world, we should be able to try to mimic that kind of same stuff here in these spaces. Now, I know that there's some technical limitations, right? Like parcels are expensive. It's not like you buy a bunch of them randomly and just kind of turn them on whenever you want. It's going to require some sort of like conversation. It's going to require figuring out who owns particular parcels and maybe having a dialogue and seeing how you can work together. But again, that's just like the real world. You go to a space, you ask them, you talk to them, you get to know them, and then potentially you can build something there. And so it's taking a lot of those same principles of being very like assertive and saying, how can I put myself in this space so that I'm more visible? And I know like that's a hard thing to really do. You kind of have to really get over the idea of like self-promotion being icky and saying this is bigger than me. Like I want my work to like have be a conversation starter. How do I do it? It needs to be visible. How do I get it visible? I gotta ask people. I gotta work with people. I gotta get it out in some interesting way. So I think the metaverse is going to be very integral to building the legend of artists if you choose to use it. You don't have to. I don't think it's going to be a make or break for artists, but I feel like if you want to be able to be a part of a larger cultural conversation as an artist, then you want to use every physical, like digital tool or environment at your disposal. And metaverses is one of those ways in which you can do that.
Yeah. Well, that was so interesting to hear it coming from you, you know, from an artist standpoint. So I really wanted to thank you for sharing all these great thoughts, so deep and well explained about the use of the metaverse for artists and more in general, what these may like in the near future when it goes into the actual physical environment. So I really wanted to thank you once again for joining the Behind the Screen series tonight. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And thanks to everyone watching and joining this and sharing questions and thoughts. It's been amazing to have such a great conversation. Special thanks to KnownOrigin and MoCDA for hosting the series. And once again, thank you all for joining. We'll see the work on KnownOrigin and also through social media platform. But it's been a pleasure, Sirsu, to have you on this chat. And please feel free to keep sharing your work, and let's keep the conversation going on Twitter and on, you know, different platforms where we can all keep in touch, and stay safe.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to have been here to talk about my work. You know, of course, you know, this couldn't be possible without MoCDA, without KnownOrigin. So special thanks to all of you to make this thing happen. I'm glad I got the opportunity to talk. And of course, you know, when it comes to the work, if anyone as an artist wants to pick my brain and figure out how to like get certain things going, please reach out to me on Twitter at VanePSN. It's definitely on like the ticker at the bottom. Same thing with my Instagram. You can reach out to me there. You know, I try to be open and as accessible as possible. You know, for folks who are very interested in wanting to break into the space and don't necessarily know how, reach out to me. I'll get you connected with the guys at One Off. That's pretty much their whole entire thing, is to figure out how to bring new artists into the space and how to build safe and open environments for you guys to do your best work. And then, of course, if you're interested in the work that I'm doing, you can check me out on digitalbodies.xyz. You can check me out on KnownOrigin. For example, I have a new piece that's coming out with it's a dynamic AR poster. You're going to start with like these, right? You're going to be able to see them anywhere through like Adobe Aero or whatever the case is. It's in full 3D. The actual figure moves and moves around. I'm hosting one new version of this every month for an entire year if you own it. It's going to be a very interesting conversation piece. It's going to have an interactive web layer to it as well. So if you're interested in that, please make an offer. I would love to have some new collectors. But yeah, that's pretty much me. I guess let's bring David back.
Yeah, no, I think we can just conclude the talk here. I don't think if David is coming back, but it's been wonderful to have you, and thank you for showing us the last piece. It's so interesting. I saw it now on Origin. Yes, it's so fascinating and also very accessible. So I hope this brings new collectors into the space and also artists supporting artists. And thank you once again for joining us tonight. It's been honestly a pleasure to have you on the series.
Thank you so much. Can't wait to see what other artists are going to be on here. And yeah, this has been great. So let's do more.
Yes, let's keep it up. Thank you. We'll stay in touch and take care, everybody. Stay safe. Bye for now. Take care.